Here at Super Return Africa in Cape Town, I have with me Sam Mehta, Director of the Atlas Family Office. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
What investment case can be made for LPs to invest in Africa right now, given that developed markets seem so overpriced?
Yeah, I think LPs, most of us think a lot longer term. Family offices specifically are extremely long term in our horizon and mindset. So the way we tend to look at the world is we're probably going to ease off investments in other parts of the world in the next coming quarters, especially as we cash out. There's clearly an overpricing in certain parts in the public markets in the United States, and North America has been very good for us. So when we ease off capital in those areas, we have to deploy it in other areas. If we're honest about it, across the different geographies in the developing world, Africa is one that's quite light in our particular portfolio, and I suspect that the portfolio of most LPs out there. So it's a great time to consider investing. I think we will have to look at the specific opportunities because some do feel overpriced, but the feel is if you pick the right opportunities in a great open minefield of growth prospect, you will do well. So if this is a good time to invest, then this is a good time to invest, right? So I think from that point of view, this is a good time to play and look at Africa to get smarter before we actually deploy the capital, because it does take time for most LPs and family offices specifically to deploy capital.
Thank you. And in terms of the opportunity, which you mentioned, obviously we've had DFIs, fund of funds, being quite significant LPs in Africa. What opportunities in particular bring family offices to the continent?
Yeah, I would say returns, right? It's opportunity and returns, but it's probably a bit more than that. I think Africa as a group of nations have to thank the DFIs and the MFIs because they really were the pioneers who put you on the map for having the possibility of building out fund managers who, if we look at it 10 years ago, weren't even there, right? So today you have a lot of interesting fund managers out and about. Some of them have started returning some degree of capital. I think you've got folks who have hybrid structures that are not on the common path that we are actually quite excited to see. We're seeing many more of the GPs that come in from an entrepreneurial operating background, which is great to see because our feel is you have to supplement the deal-making skills of the banker with the what we call the consulting stroke stakeholder relationship, as well as strategic value unlocker of the consultant, right? And especially in most developing markets, the operating mindset wins a lot more wars than the idea mindset. So I think there's a great opportunity. I think family offices that when we think longer term, when we're willing to put capital at play for a lot longer term, there is opportunity here. I think this can be a bigger part of most of our portfolios. Is it going to be the biggest part of our portfolio? No. But can it represent a significantly wider area than it does today? The answer is absolutely. Why not?
Sounds great for Africa. In terms of the risks then, what kind of risks do you foresee for family offices?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. We've clearly seen recent experiences where governance is a key issue, where people tell us X and we find out ABC. And this is something we're still trying to understand. Who do we go to for advice? Who do we go to for reference checks on companies, on individuals, on GPs? This is something that we're finding quite hard as a family office. I think the reference checks we tend to do typically, most family offices tend to like having reference checks with other family offices. But this isn't that wide a pool in Africa. So whereas, for example, when we entered India, there were a couple of other family offices today around us that we can kind of like pick up the phone and say, hey, what's your experience with GPX? You can't do the same thing that easily here. I mean, the DFIs and MFIs, for various reasons, are always a little bit more sensitive on what they share. They're probably a little bit more, they don't tend to be as open on some of their negative experiences, which is fair. I mean, it's not to belittle or to feel worse, but it is something that makes our life much tougher because that is our primary way of understanding the business. I think the other part is it's just the language barrier and the travel barrier are real.
Yeah.
And when you're a family office that has an investment committee that then has to sign off on a deal, the capability of ours to socialize them on what we're doing on the ground, to show them the value, to kind of like have them sit down so they can see the other 3 opportunities around it, are just much harder, because when we talk to folks and try and invite them here, the reluctance in different parts of Africa is there. So how do we get family members to socialize? We're trying simple things like starting inviting them for holidays. That seems to be a hopefully winning trick. Whereas in India, we just had 50% of all our investment committee offices, meetings in a whole year, for 5 years in India. And that basically meant that people spent time on the ground, they understood the seriousness. Even when times were tough, they were willing to look forward, and they were willing to think of the longer term, because they saw some real things on the ground. They were able to socialize with very successful families, with very successful GPs, with other LPs, as well as with the entrepreneurs downstream, and sometimes even the consumers, right? And when you see that, the world feels real. It is real. But when you look at it from a distance on a piece of paper, for families that have inherently made their wealth through their entrepreneurial endeavors or real assets, the capacity to then understand paper versus real things is not the same.
Sounds like you can help family offices blaze the trail across Africa, Sam.
I can help a few.
In terms of opportunities again, what sectors and regions do you think are likely to be most attractive?
Yeah, so region I can't answer fairly, because I mean clearly most of the capital has been coming to South Africa, and then obviously Nigeria, Egypt and Kenya has seen a lot of interest. I think we would probably follow in a similar ilk, because trying to find people you trust, the development of the markets, the liquidity of the markets, not so simple. The areas, clearly we think financial inclusion, so fintech, I think is a big deal maker across Africa. I think that will be, we're already seeing parts of that in specific countries, but what happens if there is a pan-African or a pan-regional play of specific payments gateways, of switches, of different, I'm not talking about the cryptocurrencies and that thing, we don't fully understand that, so don't talk about what you don't understand, and never invest in what you don't understand. But clearly financial technology, tech in general, I think will be a big play here. The consumer commerce economy, what we call MU commerce, and we love healthcare, right? But I think there will be one other thing that will be different in Africa versus other parts of the world. I think actually tourism will be a big play here. I think there's a great opportunity to get structured, organized tourism. I think the other big macro opportunity would probably be education, because clearly you have the number of folks just in most developing markets that want to go to closer access plays. So having more opportunities and things like that. But we're bullish on healthcare because we like it, we understand it, and we're trying to figure out when are we going to see the first Pan-African healthcare systems come out, because they will be better at understanding the healthcare needs of the consumer across different regions in Africa, right? And
on that point, how do you see the healthcare sector evolving across the continent?
Yeah, I mean, clearly I think, I mean, something we learned when we started looking at, I mean, we'd been in healthcare a long time in India, but clearly I think from a family office, the capacity to unlock and show value to the rest of the family that healthcare was going to be such a big deal took a bit more time. So aspects like home healthcare were things that didn't exist in India. Today, that doesn't exist in Africa. The capacity for somebody pulling together a home healthcare system in Africa, which starts allowing at least a lot of people whose plan B in life would have been maids or folks who do perhaps a lot more menial work versus care and cure, I think is a huge opportunity. I think the second piece is I think technology and healthcare will be a big deal. But I actually think Africa needs healthcare assets. I was delighted to see the first use of drone technology to distribute blood, right? And it's superb in a place that's highly distributed. And there are now talks about bringing the same thing that was proved out in Rwanda into parts of India. So, I mean, if you're asking me how can we learn from each other, these are simple things. Yeah. I mean, you know, we joke about it. One of the reasons we love coming to Africa and to different parts of Africa is we see people, the culture, smiling at small things brighter, right? And we don't see that in many parts of the world. We see people complaining more. We see people perhaps tearing each other apart for the wrong reasons. But here, I think with a much harder opening wicket, you're able to deliver so much more. And you're able to smile so much more with it. And I think that's what we see in Africa, that if you look at that in healthcare, areas like emotional well-being in general, I think you can teach the world many more things. So seeing strong plays that bring in some of the best ingredients of what happens in, say, Nigeria, Kenya, versus perhaps the clinical discipline of South Africa, as well as other parts of Africa, may be very interesting. So, yeah.
And then what's the biggest difference, if you could think of one thing, biggest difference between Africa and India, for example, other areas where you're active? Just one.
The space. I can walk around and not meet that many people. In India, it's a crowd everywhere. But if you ask me on a more serious note, I actually see people here smiling much more. I see people there perhaps struggling a little bit more. But I think the smile factor is so much nicer here.
Sam, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Thanks a lot.